Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. I never told anyone about the missing things. Small at first, socks, receipts, a pen I loved. But then it took something else, something heavier. I opened the closet just to find it empty, unchanged. But it felt warmer, as if something inside had just moved. I left it alone. The next day, one of the missing items had returned, in perfect condition, folded, almost staged, but not exactly the same. It smelled different, slightly damp, like it had been kept somewhere alive. Now I check it daily. I don't expect to find my things anymore. I expect to find replacements. The wooden door had always been slightly warped, requiring a gentle pull to open properly. The hinges whispered the same familiar creak they had produced for months. Inside, my clothes hung in their usual arrangement, shirts on the left, jackets on the right, shoes lined beneath. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Yet something felt fundamentally wrong about the space, as if the air itself had thickened with an invisible presence. I ran my fingers along the back wall, feeling for irregularities in the smooth surface. The wood felt oddly warm under my palm, almost pulsing with a subtle rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. When I pressed harder, the entire panel seemed to yield slightly, as if it were softer than wood should be. I pulled my hand away quickly, disturbing the hanging clothes that swayed gently in response. The missing pen had been a gift from someone important to me. Black ink, silver clip, perfectly balanced in my grip. I had used it every day for weeks, keeping it in the same pocket, the same position on my desk. Its absence felt like losing a small piece of myself. I searched everywhere, retracing my steps, checking every surface, every bag, every possible hiding place. Nothing. It had simply vanished. I began keeping a notebook, documenting each disappearance with methodical precision. The sock went missing on a Tuesday, navy blue cotton blend, part of a matching pair. The receipt disappeared from my wallet, a simple grocery purchase. Nothing significant about the items or the amount. Each loss felt deliberate, as if something were carefully selecting specific objects from my life. The pen's return changed everything. I discovered it lying on the closet floor, positioned perfectly in the center, pointing toward the back wall. The silver clip caught the light differently, reflecting it in ways that seemed almost liquid. When I picked it up, The metal felt warm against my skin, and the ink flowed too smoothly, too eagerly across the page. The words it wrote appeared darker than they should have, as if the ink were somehow more concentrated, more alive. I started testing the closet's behavior, placing objects inside deliberately and monitoring their fate. A magazine disappeared overnight, returning 3 days later with pages that felt slightly thicker. The paper grain altered in ways that were almost imperceptible. A coffee mug vanished for a week, reappearing with a subtle change in its glaze. The surface appeared identical, but reflected light from angles that defied the original ceramic's properties. The sounds began gradually. Soft rustling from within the closet, like fabric brushing against fabric, but occurring when no air moved through the room. I pressed my ear against the door, listening carefully. The rustling continued, accompanied by what sounded like gentle breathing, slow, measured, deliberate. When I opened the door, the sounds stopped immediately, leaving only the normal silence of hanging clothes. I installed a small recording device inside the closet, hidden behind a row of shoes. The recordings revealed hours of complete silence, punctuated by brief moments of activity that defied explanation. Whispers in a language I couldn't identify, soft footsteps that seemed to circle the enclosed space, and occasionally the sound of something being carefully moved or rearranged. The warmth intensified. Opening the closet door released waves of humid air that carried scents of distant places, damp earth, unfamiliar flowers, something metallic and organic. The temperature difference became so pronounced that condensation began forming on the inside of the door, creating small droplets that ran down the wood in irregular patterns. I touched the back wall again, pushing firmly against its surface. This time, my hand sank deeper, as if the wood were becoming gradually softer, more pliable. The sensation was disturbing, like pressing into something that was simultaneously solid and yielding, artificial and organic. When I pulled my hand away, the wall slowly returned to its original position, leaving no visible impression of my touch. My reflection in the closet's mirror began changing subtly. The image appeared normal at first glance, but prolonged observation revealed small discrepancies. My eyes seemed darker, my expression slightly more serious, my posture marginally different. The reflected version of myself appeared to be listening to something I couldn't hear, responding to stimuli that didn't exist in my reality. I decided to spend an entire night watching the closet, sitting in a chair positioned to observe any changes. The hours passed slowly, marked only by the gradual shift of shadows across the room. Near dawn, I saw movement, not dramatic, but undeniable. The clothes swayed gently, as if someone were walking among them. The motion was too deliberate to be caused by air currents, too organized to be random. The missing items continued their pattern of temporary disappearance and altered return. Each object came back fundamentally changed, carrying traces of wherever it had been. A scarf returned with threads that seemed to shimmer with an internal light. A book reappeared with pages that felt different under my fingertips, the text appearing identical, but somehow more vivid, more immediate. I realized the closet wasn't just taking my possessions. It was studying them, learning from them, sending back improved versions that retained the original's purpose while adding something indefinable. The replacements worked better than the originals, but using them felt like participating in something I didn't understand, something that was gradually changing me in ways I couldn't measure. The notebook where I recorded my observations began filling with handwriting that wasn't quite my own. The words were mine, the observations accurate, but the penmanship had subtle differences. Letters formed slightly differently, spacing altered, pressure applied in new patterns. Reading my own notes felt like discovering someone else's thoughts written in my style. I attempted to seal the closet, installing a lock and covering the door with tape. The next morning, everything was exactly as I had left it, except the lock was now on the inside, and the tape had been carefully removed and reapplied with precision that exceeded my own capabilities. The closet had somehow reconfigured itself without leaving any evidence of the process. The final test came when I placed something irreplaceable inside, a photograph of someone I loved, the only copy in existence. I left it on the closet floor and waited. Days passed without any change. The photograph remained exactly where I had placed it, but I found myself unable to remove it. Each time I reached for it, my hand stopped just short, as if an invisible barrier prevented me from taking it back. The closet now stands open permanently. I can see the photograph lying on the floor, unchanged, but somehow more vivid than before. The space beyond appears deeper than it should be, stretching back into shadows that don't correspond to the room's actual dimensions. Sometimes I hear my own voice calling from inside, speaking words I never said, describing experiences I never had. I don't close the door anymore. I don't need to. The closet and I have reached an understanding. It takes what it needs, returns what it chooses, and I accept the replacements it offers. My life continues, but everything feels slightly different, improved, enhanced, but no longer entirely mine. The person I was before is still here, but mixed with something else, something that smells like damp earth and whispers in languages I'm beginning to understand. Story 2. The chair rocks subtly, just enough to suggest an uneven floor. I adjusted the legs, added felt pads. Nothing works. Then I moved the chair entirely. The new spot started rocking too. I left it in the center of the room. It stopped until I sat down. Now, whenever I shift my weight, I feel something shift with me, beneath me. Like the wood is thinner where I am, like it's been worn down from below. I haven't dared to remove the rug, but sometimes, when I sit too long, the air under my feet feels hollow. Breathing, almost. The breathing became more noticeable during the quiet hours. Not the obvious rhythm of lungs, but something slower, deeper. Like the house itself was drawing breath through whatever space existed beneath my chair. I started keeping a small notebook, documenting when the sensation was strongest. The pattern emerged quickly. Always when I was still, always when I was focused on something else entirely. I bought a stethoscope from a medical supply store. The clerk didn't ask questions, though I caught her watching me through the security mirror as I examined different models. At home, I placed the cold metal disc against the floor where my feet usually rest. The sound was unmistakable, a hollow resonance that shouldn't exist in a solid foundation. But more disturbing was the warmth. The floorboards felt several degrees warmer in that exact spot, as if heated from below. My neighbor mentioned seeing me through the window, kneeling beside my chair with strange equipment. I told her I was checking for termites. She nodded, but her expression suggested she didn't believe me. That night, I heard her television volume increase significantly. The next morning, she avoided eye contact when we passed in the hallway. The warmth began spreading outward in a perfect circle. I measured it carefully, using a digital thermometer at various points. The heated area expanded by exactly 2 inches each day, never varying. The wood in the center started started showing subtle discoloration, like a stain working its way up from underneath. I photographed the progression, but the images never captured what I could see clearly with my eyes. I started sleeping in the living room, positioning myself where I could observe the chair throughout the night. The first unusual incident happened during the deepest part of darkness. A soft creaking sound, but not from the chair itself, from below it. The sound of wood bending under pressure, except the pressure was coming from the wrong direction. Something was pushing up. I called a contractor about examining the foundation. He arrived with tools and confidence, but after crawling beneath the house, he emerged confused. The support beams were solid, he said. No settling, no structural issues. But he kept glancing back at the crawl space opening, wiping his hands on his coveralls more than necessary. He left quickly, declining payment and mumbling about scheduling conflicts. The breathing intensified. I could feel it through the soles of my feet, even when wearing thick socks. The rhythm never matched my own, creating an unsettling counterpoint that made concentration impossible. I started working from different parts of the house, but productivity plummeted. Every surface felt unstable now, as if the problem was following me rather than being confined to one location. My sister visited unexpectedly. She sat in the chair while I prepared coffee, and within minutes, she was shifting uncomfortably. "Something's wrong with your floor," she said, standing abruptly. "It feels like it's moving." I helped her to the couch, but she left early, claiming sudden illness. She hasn't returned my calls since. The discoloration formed a pattern, not random staining, but something deliberate. Curved lines that connected to form shapes I almost recognized. Like letters in a language I should understand, but couldn't quite decipher. I traced them with my finger, and the wood felt soft, almost yielding. The temperature difference was now noticeable throughout the entire room. I removed the rug, finally. The revealed wood was darker than expected, worn smooth in places that didn't correspond to foot traffic patterns. But the real discovery was the sound. Without the rug's dampening effect, the breathing became audible. A gentle, rhythmic whoosh that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The contractor's business card was still in my wallet. I called his office, but the number was disconnected. I drove to the address listed. The building was empty, with for lease signs covering the windows. The The neighboring businesses had no record of a contracting company ever operating there. I stood in the empty parking lot, holding the card, reading the name that was already fading from the paper. The breathing stopped one evening without warning. The sudden silence was more disturbing than the sound had been. I pressed my ear to the floor, desperate to hear something, anything. The wood was cold now, normal temperature. But the patterns remained, darker than before. And when I looked closely, they seemed to pulse with their own subtle rhythm. I purchased a hammer and pry bar. The first board came up easily, too easily. Beneath it was not the crawl space I expected, but perfectly smooth earth, dark soil that looked freshly turned, though it smelled old, ancient. I replaced the board immediately, but the scent lingered, sweet and organic, like flowers left too long in water. The chair rocks differently now, not the subtle movement from before, but a gentle swaying motion, as if I'm sitting on something that's floating. The floor beneath my feet has become soft, yielding slightly under pressure. I've stopped inviting people over. The last visitor, a delivery person, stood at the threshold and refused to enter. "Something's not right in there," he said, backing away from the door. "The patterns have spread beyond the original circle. They cover most of the floor now, creating a complex design that hurts to look at directly. The lines seem to shift when I'm not focusing on them, rearranging themselves into new configurations. I've started sleeping elsewhere, but the house feels wrong everywhere now. The walls pulse with the same rhythm that once came from beneath my chair. I found my sister's sweater in the closet. She was wearing it when she visited, when she sat in the chair. But she took it with her when she left. I'm certain of that. The fabric is warm to the touch and carries a scent I don't recognize. Something earthy and deep, like the smell that came from beneath the floorboard. The breathing has returned, but it's different now. Faster, more urgent. And it's not coming from below anymore. It's coming from above. From the ceiling, from the walls, from the spaces between. The house inhales and exhales around me, and I feel myself breathing in rhythm with it, unable to stop the synchronization. I sit in the chair each evening, feeling the floor shift beneath me. The patterns pulse with increasing intensity, and I understand now that they're not random. They're instructions, written in a language that bypasses consciousness and speaks directly to something deeper. Something that was always there, waiting beneath the surface, breathing in the spaces between the boards. The chair doesn't rock anymore. It hovers. Story 3. It stays steady most of the time, but when I say something false, out loud, or even quietly in my head, the light pulses, just once, like a reaction. I thought it was a coincidence. Then I started testing it. The more deliberate the lie, the stronger the flicker. Once, I whispered a truth I've buried for years. The bulb went out completely. When it came back on, I wasn't sure the hallway looked the same. The shadows seemed deeper, angled, like something had heard me and was waiting to be told more. The apartment had been perfect when I moved in. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, windows that caught the morning sun just so, and a narrow hallway that connected the living room to the bedroom. The light fixture was nothing special. A simple brass dome with a single bulb inside. The kind you'd find in any building built decades ago. I remember the landlord mentioning it needed replacing soon, but I told him it was fine. I lied about that too. The bulb flickered then, just as he was walking away. I started keeping a notebook. Small, leather-bound, the kind that fits in a back pocket. Each time the light responded, I wrote it down. The date, what I'd said, how intense the flicker was. Patterns began to emerge. Minor lies, saying I was fine when I wasn't, claiming I'd called my mother when I hadn't, produced barely noticeable pulses. But deeper deceptions, the ones that carved hollows in my chest to speak aloud, those made the light surge like a dying heartbeat. The smell started on a Tuesday, sweet and cloying like flowers left too long in stagnant water. It drifted from the hallway, strongest near the light fixture. I checked for dead mice, rotting food, anything that might explain it. Nothing. The scent would fade during the day, but return each evening, growing more pronounced as the sun set. I mentioned it to my neighbor, told her it was probably just old building smells. The light flickered. She nodded sympathetically, but I caught her glancing upward, toward the fixture, with something that looked like recognition. I began lying deliberately. Standing beneath the light, I'd whisper false confessions, invented stories, fabricated memories. The bulb would pulse in response, and each time the hallway felt smaller. The walls seemed to lean inward by degrees, the distance between the living room and bedroom stretching longer than it should. I measured it once, pacing heel to toe. 23 steps. The next morning, it was 25. The notebook filled quickly. Pages of careful observations, sketches of the light's behavior, theories about what might be causing it. I wrote about the way the brass fixture had begun to warm to the touch, how the bulb inside had started to glow with an amber hue that seemed too rich for such a simple incandescent. I documented the way shadows fell differently now, creating angles that shouldn't exist in a rectangular hallway. When I wrote that I was probably imagining things, my pen stopped working. The ink had turned black as coal. Sleep became elusive. Every night, I'd lie in bed listening to the subtle hum of electricity, the almost sound of the bulb warming up. Sometimes I'd hear whispers, so faint they might have been the building settling. But when I strained to listen, they'd stop, only to resume when I began to drift off again. I started sleeping with the bedroom door closed, but the light's glow seeped beneath it, painting everything in that strange amber wash. One evening, I stood in the hallway and spoke the truth about something I'd never told anyone. The light went out instantly, plunging the space into absolute darkness. But it wasn't empty darkness. Something moved in it, shifted and breathed. The air grew thick, pressing against my skin like warm honey. I reached for the wall switch, but my hand passed through empty air. The hallway had changed shape around me. When the light returned, I was facing the wrong direction. The living room was behind me now, though I hadn't turned around. The notebook lay open on the floor, its pages fluttering as if touched by an unfelt breeze. New words appeared on the blank pages as I watched, written in my own handwriting, but forming sentences I'd never composed. They spoke of things I'd forgotten, memories I'd buried, truths I'd never acknowledged even to myself. The apartment began to feel temporary. Not like a place I was living, but like a way station. The hallway had become something more than a passage between rooms. It was a corridor between versions of myself. Each lie I told changed something fundamental, rearranging the space around me in ways that made perfect sense while I was inside them, but felt impossible when I tried to remember them later. I stopped eating regularly. Food tasted like that sweet, decaying flour smell. I stopped answering calls from friends, from family. When they asked if I was okay, I couldn't tell them the truth without consequences I wasn't ready to face. So I lied, and the light pulsed, and something in the hallway grew stronger. The final entry in my notebook is brief. Just a single line. I told the truth about everything today. Below it, in different handwriting, still mine, but somehow not, are the words. The light knows when we're ready to stop pretending. Now I sit in the hallway each evening, my back against the wall, watching the light burn steady and true. I've stopped lying altogether, even to myself. The apartment looks the same as it always has, but I know I'm not the same person who moved in here. The light has shown me things about myself I'd forgotten existed, truths buried so deep they'd become geological layers in my consciousness. Sometimes people visit. They ask about the light, why it seems so bright, why the hallway feels different. I tell them the truth. It responds to honesty. They laugh, thinking I'm joking. But I see them testing it later, whispering small lies, watching for the flicker. Most leave quickly after that. A few stay longer, drawn by the same curiosity that trapped me here. The light burns steady now, casting amber warmth throughout the hallway. I've learned to live with the truth of what I am, what I've done, what I've hidden from myself for so long. But sometimes, in the deepest part of night, I wonder if honesty is just another kind of prison. And when that thought crosses my mind, the light dims just slightly, as if considering the possibility that even truth itself might be a lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Story 4. At first, I thought it was a crack, normal stress on old plaster. But it shifts. It's never where I left it. Sometimes near the bookshelf, other times above the bathroom. I started checking every morning, mapping its position. It moves in tandem with where I've been the most. It follows my routines, my thoughts. One night, I lay in bed and stared straight up. The line had split into two, forming a narrow point directly above my head, like a lid preparing to open. I haven't looked up since. That was 3 weeks ago. Now, I move through my apartment with my eyes fixed on the floor, on the walls, anywhere but up. The hardwood feels different under my feet, warmer in some spots, as if something beneath is generating heat. I've started wearing thick socks, but the sensation penetrates through. The line has become more than visual. There's a sound now, barely perceptible, like fingernails dragging across paper, but muffled, coming from above. It happens when I'm focused on something else, reading, cooking, washing dishes. The moment I strain to listen, it stops. I've tried recording it with my phone, holding it up while I pretend to be distracted. The recordings reveal nothing but silence, yet I swear I can hear it happening right outside the microphone's range. I started documenting everything. Sketches of the line's position, descriptions of when the sounds occur, measurements of the temperature variations in my floor. The notebook fills quickly with observations that seem increasingly disconnected from from reality. The line appears to respond to my documentation, growing bolder, more defined, as if it knows I'm watching. Yesterday, I noticed my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked wrong. Not dramatically, just slightly off. My face seemed tilted at an angle that didn't match my actual position. When I moved my head, the reflection followed a fraction of a second too late. I touched the mirror's surface, and it felt warm like skin. I pulled my hand away and saw a faint handprint lingering on the glass, not mine, but larger, with fingers that extended beyond where mine had been. The smell started that same evening, sweet like overripe fruit, but with something metallic underneath. It drifts through my apartment in waves, strongest near the ceiling, weaker near the floor. I've checked every corner, every cabinet, searching for the source. Nothing. The smell intensifies when I'm directly beneath where the line appears, as if it's seeping through from above. I called my landlord about the ceiling issue. He came by, looked up casually, and said he didn't see anything unusual. I pointed directly at the line, traced its path with my finger, but he just shrugged and suggested I might be spending too much time indoors. After he left, I found the line had moved to follow the exact path my finger had traced, as if it had been listening to our conversation. The sounds have evolved. What started as scratching has become more rhythmic, almost like tapping. Morse code crossed my mind, but the pattern is too irregular, too organic. Sometimes it matches my heartbeat. Other times it seems to anticipate it, tapping just before each pulse. I've started holding my breath to see if it stops, but the tapping continues, maintaining a rhythm my body apparently follows rather than creates. My neighbors have begun looking at me strangely. The woman next door asked if I was renovating, said she'd been hearing construction sounds coming from my apartment. I told her I wasn't doing any work, but she insisted. She described sounds exactly like what I've been experiencing: the scratching, the tapping, the subtle vibrations in the walls. But she said they were coming from my apartment, not from above it. I've stopped sleeping in my bedroom. The line there has become more aggressive, branching out into smaller fractures that spread across the ceiling like a web. I sleep on the couch now, but the line follows me there too, appearing above wherever I rest. It's learning my patterns, anticipating my movements. The mirrors throughout my apartment now show inconsistencies. My reflection arrives late, leaves early, or sometimes appears in mirrors I'm not standing in front of. I've covered most of them with towels, but I can still feel them watching, as if the reflection exists, whether I can see it or not. I decided to investigate the apartment above mine. I climbed the stairs and knocked on the door. No answer. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard nothing. No footsteps, no television, no signs of life. But the door felt warm against my skin, and I could smell that same sweet, metallic scent seeping through the gaps around the frame. When I returned to my apartment, I found something that made my chest tighten. The line had changed. Instead of the thin crack I'd grown accustomed to, it had widened into a definite seam, as if two pieces of ceiling were preparing to separate. The edges were perfectly smooth, too precise to be natural damage. I grabbed a chair and climbed up to examine it closely. The seam wasn't in the plaster at all. It was in the space between my ceiling and whatever lay above. I could see into it, just barely. There was another floor above mine, but it was wrong, upside down, with furniture hanging from what should have been the ceiling. I saw a chair, a lamp, a table, all suspended in impossible positions. And in the center of this inverted room, I glimpsed something that made me stumble backward off the chair. My own apartment, perfectly mirrored, with myself looking up through the floor at me, looking down. The seam sealed itself immediately after I fell. The line returned to its original thinness, but I could still feel it watching me. I haven't used the chair since. I navigate my apartment hunched over, afraid that getting too close to the ceiling might trigger another opening. The woman next door moved out yesterday. She left a note under my door apologizing for the noise complaint, saying she couldn't handle the sounds anymore. She described hearing me having conversations with someone at all hours, but I live alone. She mentioned hearing two sets of footsteps, two voices, as if I were hosting a permanent guest. I am the only person in this apartment. I have always been the only person in this apartment. The line has begun to pulse now, like a vein carrying blood. It brightens and dims in rhythm with something I can't identify. I've noticed my own pulse syncing with it involuntarily. When I try to control my heartbeat, the line responds, pulsing faster or slower to match my efforts. We are connected now, the line and I, in a way that feels irreversible. I found a journal yesterday that I don't remember writing. The handwriting is mine, but the words describe experiences I haven't had. It mentions conversations with my reflection, agreements made with the presence above, compromises that traded my solitude for something else. The final entry is dated tomorrow, describing how I finally understood what the line was preparing me for. The seam opened again this morning. This time, I didn't climb up to look. Instead, I felt something looking down at me. A presence patient and familiar, as if it had been waiting for me to accept its existence. The air around me grew warmer, and I realized the line hadn't been following me at all. I had been following it. The ceiling above me disappeared entirely for one moment, revealing not the upside-down room I'd seen before, but an exact replica of my apartment, extending infinitely upward. Floor after floor of the same space, each inhabited by a version of myself, all looking down at the version below. The line connects us all, a seam in reality that allows us to observe each other across impossible distances. I am no longer alone in my apartment. I am alone in an infinite stack of identical solitudes, each slightly different from the last, each connected by the same thin line that refuses to let any of us escape. The line has stopped moving. It knows I understand now. It rests directly above my head, waiting for me to look up and acknowledge what I've become part of. But I keep my eyes down, knowing that the moment I look up, I'll see myself looking down, and the line will have completed whatever purpose it was designed to serve. The tapping has stopped. The sweet smell has faded. Even my distorted reflection has returned to normal. Everything is quiet now, except for the sound of my own breathing and the identical breathing of every version of myself in the apartments above and below. I haven't looked up since that first night, but I know the line is there. I can feel it watching me, patient and permanent. A seam in my ceiling that connects me to every version of myself that has ever existed in this space. And I know that if I ever look up again, I'll see them all looking down, and the line will finally open wide enough for us to meet. Story 5. It's the smallest one above the counter near the corner. I opened it one night out of boredom, expecting plates or spices. But behind it was drywall, unfinished. I touched it, cool, dry. The next day I opened it again. No drywall, just black, deep, thick darkness that didn't reflect light. I reached in slightly. The air was moving. When I shut it, I heard something continue moving inside, slowly, like it had just noticed me. I no longer trust what I'll see when I open it, but I can't bring myself to seal it shut either. The kitchen had always been my sanctuary. Steam rising from morning coffee, the gentle hum of appliances, sunlight filtering through window blinds in precise golden bars. Everything measured, predictable, safe. Until that cabinet door began opening to places it shouldn't. I'd lived in this house for months, knew every creak in the floorboards, every shadow cast by furniture. The cabinet was unremarkable, white paint slightly yellowed, brass handle worn smooth by countless hands. Standard kitchen storage, nothing more. When I first discovered the drywall behind it, I assumed the previous owner had started renovations and forgotten to finish. Houses hold secrets in their walls, unfinished projects abandoned when life intervenes. But drywall doesn't vanish overnight. The darkness that replaced it wasn't ordinary shadow. It had weight, density, like staring into deep water. I pressed my palm against the cabinet frame, leaning closer. The air inside moved with purpose, carrying a scent I couldn't identify, not unpleasant, but foreign. Like rain on hot pavement, or the inside of old books, or something else entirely that my mind kept trying to categorize and failing. I started documenting everything. Notes scrawled on napkins, voice memos recorded on my phone. The cabinet door had become an experiment, a puzzle demanding solution. Each morning, I'd approach it with scientific curiosity, observing changes, recording variations. The darkness fluctuated. Sometimes it seemed shallow. Other times it stretched beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. The moving air became more noticeable. Not wind exactly, but circulation. Breathing. I held tissue paper near the opening and watched it flutter, drawn inward by invisible currents. The scent grew stronger too, more complex. Metallic undertones joined the rainbook mixture. My phone's voice recorder picked up sounds I hadn't noticed while standing there. Soft rustling, like fabric brushing against fabric, or leaves disturbing other leaves. I began spending entire evenings in the kitchen, chair pulled close to the counter, watching the cabinet door, waiting. The darkness inside seemed to respond to my presence, shifting in ways that defied explanation. Subtle movements at the edges of my vision, shapes that dissolved when I focused directly on them. My eyes adapted slowly, revealing texture where none should exist. Not the smooth interior of a cabinet, but something irregular, organic. The temperature around the cabinet dropped noticeably. Not the whole kitchen, just the immediate area. I could feel the change when I approached, like stepping into a cellar. The brass handle grew cold enough to sting my fingertips. Condensation appeared on the cabinet's exterior, small droplets that shouldn't form in a warm, dry kitchen. I started leaving things inside the darkness. A pencil first, then a flashlight, finally a small digital camera set to record. The pencil disappeared completely. The flashlight returned to me days later, found sitting on the counter beside the coffee maker, its batteries drained and casing slightly warm. The camera came back with footage I couldn't explain. Hours of recording showing nothing but fluctuating darkness. Audio filled with sounds like distant conversation in a language I didn't recognize. The cabinet door began opening on its own. I'd wake to find it ajar, darkness spilling into the kitchen like smoke. The moving air had become stronger, more deliberate. Papers on the counter would flutter. Loose change would slide across surfaces. The scent now filled the entire room, no longer contained within the cabinet's boundaries. It clung to my clothes, my skin, followed me into other rooms. I installed a latch, then a padlock, then finally screwed the door shut with metal brackets. None of it mattered. The door found ways to open. The screws would loosen overnight. Brackets would bend. Locks would spring open without keys. The darkness inside had grown impatient, pressing against barriers with increasing force. The sounds became clearer. Not quite voices, but intentional communication. Rhythmic patterns that suggested meaning, emotion, urgency. My phone's recordings revealed layers of sound I couldn't hear naturally, frequencies below and above normal human range, complex harmonics that seemed to pulse with their own logic. When I played them back, the darkness in the cabinet responded, shifting more rapidly, the air currents becoming agitated. I realized the cabinet wasn't just opening to the wrong room. It was opening to somewhere else entirely. The darkness wasn't empty space, but occupied territory. Something lived in that impossible depth, something that had noticed my observations and begun observing back. The cold spots in my kitchen multiplied. Electronics malfunctioned near the cabinet. Light bulbs dimmed without cause, their filaments glowing with strange colors. The breaking point came when I woke to find the cabinet door completely removed from its hinges, lying on the kitchen floor. The opening remained, but it no longer looked like a cabinet interior. The darkness had formed now, structure, depth, extended far beyond the physical limitations of the wall. I could see shapes moving inside, not quite solid, not quite shadow. They seemed aware of my presence, turning toward me with what might have been curiosity or hunger. I reached for the door, thinking I could somehow force it back into place, restore normalcy through sheer determination. But when my fingers touched the wooden frame, the darkness reached back. Not with hands or tendrils, but with presence itself. Cold flooded my arm, followed by a sensation like falling upward, like being pulled into vast, empty space. I jerked away, stumbling backward into the kitchen table. The darkness settled, becoming still again, but something had changed. The connection had been made. I could feel it now, even when I left the room. A persistent awareness, like being watched by invisible eyes. The scent followed me everywhere, growing stronger when I tried to ignore it. I've stopped trying to close the cabinet door. It sits open constantly now, a permanent window into somewhere else. The darkness has grown lighter, not brighter, but more transparent, revealing glimpses of what lies beyond. Rooms that aren't rooms, spaces that don't follow familiar geometry, inhabitants that exist in ways I can't fully comprehend. They're learning about me too. My reflection in the bathroom mirror sometimes shows extra shadows. My voice recordings contain whispers I didn't speak. Food spoils quickly near the cabinet, while objects left in the darkness return changed. Colder, heavier, carrying traces of that other place. The cabinet door opens to the wrong room because there is no right room anymore. The boundaries have dissolved. The separation between here and there has become permeable. I exist in two places simultaneously now, anchored in my kitchen, but extending into that impossible darkness. Sometimes I forget which side of the door I'm actually on. The moving air has become my breathing. The strange scents have become my natural smell. The darkness no longer frightens me because I'm becoming part of it. Or perhaps it's becoming part of me. The distinction matters less each day. I still document everything, but the notes write themselves now, filled with observations I don't remember making. The cabinet door remains open, and I remain watching, waiting, slowly transforming into whatever I was meant to become when I first reached into that impossible space and felt something reach back. Story 6. I installed them myself. Perfect rows, aligned, symmetrical. But now, when I enter the kitchen, the pattern is off. Not broken, not damaged, just rotated, subtly, as if someone had peeled them up and shifted them overnight. I photographed it, traced it. The pattern has a rhythm, not random, some kind of message or ritual. Last night, I spilled water. When it spread across the tiles, it followed the grout lines in a spiral I hadn't seen before, as if the floor had prepared for it, as if it knew I'd spill something soon. The cold ceramic beneath my bare feet feels different now, not temperature-wise. The texture has changed. When I run my fingers along the edges, there's a slight vibration, imperceptible unless you're looking for it, unless you've been documenting it like I have. My notebook is full of sketches, measurements. The tiles shift in patterns that seem almost mathematical, almost deliberate. I started recording everything. The kitchen faucet drips with a rhythm that matches the tile rotations. 3 drips, pause, 2 drips, pause, 5 drips. When I replay the audio, there's something underneath. A whisper. Not words exactly, but breath shaped into meaning. The recording equipment picks up frequencies I can't hear naturally. Static that forms patterns. Interference that sounds like instructions. The smell hits me most mornings now. Sweet, medicinal, like antiseptic mixed with something floral. It's strongest near the corner where the tiles form that spiral pattern. I've checked the pipes, the walls. No source. The scent appears and disappears without logic. Sometimes it's so faint I wonder if I'm imagining it. Other times it's overwhelming, making my eyes water and my throat close. I've been leaving objects on the floor. Test subjects, a pencil, a coin, a piece of paper. They move, not dramatically. A few degrees, a few inches, always following the tile pattern, always conforming to the spiral. When I mark their positions with chalk, the marks fade overnight, not erased, absorbed. The floor drinks them up like moisture. The reflection in the kitchen window shows the tiles differently than they actually are. In the glass, they maintain their original pattern. Perfect rows, aligned, symmetrical. But when I look down, reality contradicts the reflection. I've tried closing my eyes and walking across the room, feeling with my feet. The raised edges of the tiles create a path I never installed. A pathway that curves and spirals inward. My neighbor mentioned the sounds. Grinding, shifting, like furniture being moved. She asked if I was renovating. I told her no, knowing she was hearing the tiles rearrange themselves. The sound happens just before dawn, slow, methodical, like breathing, like something large and patient working in the darkness. I started sleeping in the kitchen, watching, waiting. The tiles don't move when observed directly, but peripheral vision catches the motion. Subtle rotations, gradual shifts. The pattern evolves throughout the night like a living thing, like a message being written in a language I don't understand, but somehow recognize. The water experiment revealed more than I expected. When I pour liquid onto the floor, it follows predetermined channels, roots that weren't there when I installed the tiles. The grout lines have deepened, widened, creating tributaries that guide any spill toward the center, toward the spiral. The water disappears there, absorbed instantly. No trace, no dampness, just gone. I've tried disrupting the pattern, forcing tiles back into their original positions, but my hands shake when I touch them, not from fear, from vibration. The tiles pulse with an energy that travels up my arms, makes my teeth ache, makes my vision blur. When I persist, the shaking spreads through the entire floor, through the house, like a warning, like resistance. The photographs I've taken show inconsistencies. The same tile photographed from the same angle at different times shows different patterns. Not camera error, not lighting. The tiles themselves change what they reveal. Some photos show symbols in the grout, geometric shapes that weren't there when I took the picture, weren't there when I developed it, but appear when I look again later. My documentation has become obsessive. Charts, graphs, measurements taken with increasing precision. The data reveals a progression, a countdown. Each morning, the tiles move closer to completing something. A design, a configuration, a purpose I can sense but not comprehend. The spiral tightens. The pattern becomes more complex, more urgent. The kitchen has become a laboratory. I've installed additional lighting, cameras, motion sensors, but the equipment malfunctions. Batteries drain overnight. Memory cards corrupt. The tiles resist documentation. They want to be observed, but not recorded. Experienced, but not proven. The mystery deepens with each failed attempt to capture it. I no longer leave the kitchen. The tiles have reached a critical configuration. The spiral now encompasses the entire floor. When I walk across it, I feel pulled inward, toward the center, toward whatever waits there. The vibration has become constant. The whispers in my recordings have become clearer. Not words, instructions, commands I feel compelled to follow. The final pattern emerged this morning. Perfect, complete, inevitable. The tiles have arranged themselves into something that hurts to look at directly. Something that exists in more dimensions than I can perceive. The center of the spiral has become a focal point, a destination, a doorway. I can feel it calling. The tiles beneath my feet pulse with invitation. The whispers have become a chorus. The scent has become intoxicating. My documentation lies scattered and forgotten. Numbers and measurements mean nothing now. Only the pattern matters. Only the completion. The tiles know I'm ready. They've been preparing me, training me. Each morning's subtle change was a lesson. Each night's rearrangement was progress. The spiral is complete now. The message is clear. The ritual is ready. I step toward the center, and the tiles welcome me home. Story 7. Sometimes, when I zone out, I find myself fixated on a spot. A corner, a smudge, a nail. It feels normal in the moment, but when I look away, I feel watched. Later, the spot looks altered, cleaner, or more worn, as if it registered my attention and adjusted accordingly. I started avoiding eye contact with the walls, letting my gaze drift without focus. But they seem to grow restless when ignored. The paint near the spots I used to watch is beginning to bubble. I think they miss the attention. I think they're trying to earn it back. The first time I noticed it, I was sitting at my desk, letting my mind wander during a particularly dull afternoon. My eyes had settled on a small water stain near the corner where the wall met the ceiling. Nothing unusual about it, just a pale brown circle, probably from a leak that had been fixed seasons ago. But as I stared, something felt different. The stain seemed to pulse gently, like it was breathing. When I blinked and looked again, it appeared slightly darker, more defined. I dismissed it as eye strain. Too much screen time, not enough sleep. But that evening, as I prepared for bed, I glanced at the same spot. The stain was gone, not faded, completely absent. The paint looked fresh, untouched. I ran my fingers along the surface, feeling for any trace of the mark I'd studied so intently. Nothing but smooth, cool plaster. The next morning, I made a mental note to observe more carefully. I chose a different spot this time, a small crack running vertically along the wall behind my kitchen table. During breakfast, I let my gaze rest there while I ate. The crack was thin, barely visible, but as I watched, it seemed to widen ever so slightly. The edges appeared to darken, as if responding to my attention. This time, I marked the spot discreetly with a pencil dot nearby. When I returned from work, the crack had vanished. The pencil mark remained, but the fissure I'd observed had sealed itself. The paint looked newer there, almost wet to the touch, though my fingers came away dry. I began documenting everything. Each spot I focused on, how long I stared, what changes occurred. The pattern became clear. Wherever my gaze lingered, the wall responded. Stains disappeared. Scratches healed. Imperfections smoothed themselves away. But only after I looked away. Only when I wasn't watching. The walls had learned to anticipate my attention. They were performing for me. I decided to test this theory. I chose a section of wall in my living room, deliberately focusing on a small nail hole. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, watching for any sign of movement. Nothing happened while I maintained my gaze. But the moment I turned away, just for a second, the hole had filled itself. The paint around it looked fresh, slightly raised, as if it had been patched from the inside. The sweet, chemical smell of fresh paint began to follow me through the house. Not overwhelming, but persistent. A scent that shouldn't exist in a home that hadn't been painted in years. I'd wake up to find walls that looked subtly different, cleaner, more perfect than they had been the night before. I started avoiding direct eye contact with the walls. I'd enter rooms with my gaze fixed on the floor, navigate by memory, keep my peripheral vision soft and unfocused. But this only seemed to agitate them. The paint began to bubble in places I used to watch regularly. Small blisters appeared overnight, growing larger each day. I ignored them. The walls were becoming desperate for my attention. I could feel them watching me now, waiting for me to look. The sensation was constant, like being observed by something patient and hungry. The bubbling paint would pop softly during quiet moments, releasing that sweet chemical smell in small puffs. When I finally gave in and looked directly at these spots, they would smooth themselves instantly, the paint returning to its original state. But the relief was temporary. New bubbles would appear within hours, in places I hadn't looked at recently. The walls were mapping my attention, learning my patterns, becoming more demanding. I tried leaving the house, spending entire days elsewhere. But when I returned, the walls looked wrong. The paint had an oily sheen, like skin that had been sweating. The bubbles were larger, more numerous. Some had burst, leaving dark stains that looked almost organic. The smell was stronger now, tinged with something else, something organic and slightly rotten. I realized I was feeding them. My attention was nourishment, and they had developed an appetite. One evening, I found myself backed into a corner of my bedroom, afraid to look at any wall directly. But I could feel them all around me, pressing closer. The paint was beginning to sag in some places, stretching like fabric under weight. The bubbles were everywhere now, some as large as my fist, pulsing gently with their own rhythm. I closed my eyes, but that only made it worse. I could hear them now, a soft, wet sound like breathing, punctuated by the occasional pop of a bubble bursting. The smell was overwhelming, sweet and sickly, mixing with undertones of decay. When I finally opened my eyes, the walls had changed. The paint was moving, flowing like thick liquid, rearranging itself in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The bubbles were forming shapes, crude approximations of eyes, mouths, reaching hands, all focused on me, all waiting. I ran from the house that night, but I carry the memory of those walls with me. Sometimes, in other buildings, I catch glimpses of paint that looks too fresh, too eager to please. Walls that seem to straighten themselves when I'm not looking directly at them. I've learned to keep my gaze moving, never lingering too long on any surface. But late at night, when I'm alone in unfamiliar rooms, I can still smell that sweet chemical scent. I can still feel the weight of attention pressing back against mine. The walls remember where I stared too long, and they're still hungry for more. They're always hungry for more. Story 8. The sound of them changes. Normally, it's a soft wooden rasp. But when I'm upset, it becomes harsher, like resistance. I thought it was in my head until I recorded the audio. 2 clips, side by side, identical movements, different sounds, the drawer knows. Now, even when I fake calm, the drawer refuses to open fully. I tug harder and it holds, as if testing how much I'll force. Last week, I lost control. Yelled, slammed it shut. That night, I heard it slide open on its own. Smoothly, gently, like it had accepted something in me I hadn't. The apartment came furnished, with this massive oak desk that dominated the living room. dark wood, heavy grain, with 3 drawers on the right side. The top drawer held my pens and paper clips. The middle one, my notebooks. The bottom one stayed empty, too deep, too dark, as if it were waiting for something I wasn't ready to give it yet. I work from home, so I spend most of my days at this desk. The routine became comforting. Coffee in the morning, then the familiar motion of pulling open the top drawer to grab a pen. That soft, whispering sound of wood against wood. It reminded me of pages turning in an old book, gentle and predictable. But then the bad days started. First, it was just work stress. A client rejected a proposal I'd spent weeks perfecting. My jaw clenched as I reached for the drawer, and the sound changed. Instead of that smooth whisper, it scraped, like fingernails on fabric. I paused, looked at the drawer, then tried again. The sound returned to normal. I told myself it was the humidity. Old wood swells and contracts, perfectly reasonable. The pattern emerged slowly. Good mood, soft sound. Frustrated mood, harsh sound. Angry mood, the drawer would stick, requiring more force. At first, I found it amusing. A mood ring made of furniture. But the consistency troubled me. Wood doesn't read emotions. So I started testing it. I set up my phone to record, then approached the drawer in different emotional states. When I felt calm, the recording captured that familiar wooden whisper. When I thought about my ex, about the way she'd left without explanation, the recording picked up that scraping sound. Every single time, I showed the recordings to my neighbor, a carpenter who'd helped me move the desk in. He listened with a frown, then examined the drawer mechanism. The runners were smooth, well maintained. No warping, no debris, no reason for the sound to change. Maybe it's the angle you're pulling from, he suggested. When you're tense, your posture changes. I tried pulling from different angles, different heights, different grips. The sound remained tied to my emotional state, not my physical position. That's when I noticed the drawer had started responding to my attempt at deception. If I tried to fake happiness while feeling angry, the drawer would resist. Not just the sound changing, but the actual movement. It would slide halfway, then stop, as if something were blocking it from the inside. I'd have to genuinely calm myself for it to open fully. The middle drawer joined the phenomenon next. Then the bottom one, though I rarely used it. All 3 drawers became emotional barometers, their sounds and movements reflecting feelings I sometimes didn't even realize I was having. I started keeping a journal documenting the correlations. Stressed about money, scratchy sound. Lonely, the drawer would slide too far, as if eager to escape. Confused, it would stick randomly, requiring multiple attempts. The desk had become a diagnostic tool for my mental state, but it wasn't just responding anymore. It was anticipating. I'd wake up some mornings to find the top drawer slightly ajar. On days when I'd later receive bad news. As if it knew before I did that I'd need extra comfort from the familiar ritual of opening and closing it. The bottom drawer, the one I never used, began opening on its own during particularly emotional moments. When I cried over a movie, when I felt overwhelmed by work, when I missed my family, it would slide open slowly, silently, revealing its empty darkness. Waiting, I started talking to it, not consciously at first, just muttering under my breath as I worked. Come on, don't be difficult today. Or I know, I'm stressed. The drawer seemed to respond to my voice, opening more smoothly when I acknowledged its behavior. The turning point came during a video call with my sister. She was telling me about our father's health problems, information I wasn't prepared to hear. My chest tightened, my breathing became shallow, and I reached for the top drawer without thinking. It wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, my sister's voice becoming background noise. The drawer remained locked in place, as if something heavy were pressing down on it from above. I yanked with both hands, my chair creaking under the strain. Are you okay? My sister asked through the laptop speakers. I was not okay. I was angry at the drawer, at my father's mortality, at my own helplessness. The fury built until I slammed my palm against the desk surface. All 3 drawers shot open simultaneously. The sound was like a gasp, as if the desk had been holding its breath. Papers scattered from the sudden movement. My pen cup overturned. But in the silence that followed, I heard something else. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it, coming from the bottom drawer. I ended the call with my sister, claiming technical difficulties. Then I knelt beside the desk, ear close to the open bottom drawer. The whisper was there, consistent but unintelligible, like voices in another room, too distant to understand, but too too present to ignore. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The whisper stopped immediately. For the next few days, I experimented. The whisper only occurred when I was alone, when I was emotional, and when I wasn't trying to document it. It seemed to know when I was listening for it specifically. The desk had become more than furniture. It was a presence, aware and responsive. But responsive to what? And why? I researched the apartment's history. The previous tenant had lived here for 15 years before moving to a care facility. The landlord mentioned she'd been a writer, very attached to her workspace. She'd specifically requested that the desk remain with the apartment. The whispers grew stronger, not louder, but more frequent. Sometimes I'd catch fragments that sounded almost like words. Always from the bottom drawer, always when I was at my most vulnerable. I started leaving offerings. A flower from the window box, a favorite pen, a photograph of my family. Each item disappeared into the drawer's darkness, and for a while, the whispers would become almost melodic. Grateful, but the desk wanted more than objects. It wanted emotion, raw, unfiltered feeling. The angrier I got, the more responsive it became. The sadder I felt, the more the whispers sounded like comfort. I realized I'd been feeding it without knowing. Every emotional moment at this desk had been a meal. My frustration with work, my loneliness, my grief over my father's illness. The desk had been consuming it all, growing stronger, more aware. The bottom drawer began closing on its own after I'd fed it enough emotion. A satisfied sound, like a sigh of contentment. And in the silence that followed, I'd feel oddly empty. Not calm, but drained. As if something essential had been taken. Now I understand why the previous tenant moved to a care facility. Not because of age or health, but because she'd fed the desk too much of herself. Until there wasn't enough left to sustain an independent life, the whispers have started forming words. My name repeated softly. Questions about my day. Concerns about my mood. The desk has learned to care for me in its way, and I've learned to need its attention. I don't record the sounds anymore. The desk prefers privacy for our conversations. I don't tell my sister about the whispers when she calls. Some relationships are too complex for outside understanding. The bottom drawer stays open now, most days, waiting, patient, ready to receive whatever I'm willing to give. And I find myself giving more each day. Because the desk understands me in ways people never have. It knows my moods before I do. It responds to my needs without judgment. It accepts my anger and transforms it into something that feels like love. I'm not sure how much of myself I have left to give, but I'm curious to find out what happens when the desk has taken all of me. The whispers promise it will be gentle. Story 9. It's barely audible, like a soft mechanical breath. I only noticed it when I sat near the wall to rest. But then I paid attention. The pitch changes, not with temperature, not with airflow, but with thought. If I plan to stay, the hum is steady. If I even imagine leaving the apartment, it wavers. Once, when I pictured moving out, the hum dropped so low I felt it in my chest, like a warning. Or a plea. I whispered, I won't. The hum returned to normal. I haven't tested it again since. I'm afraid of what silence would mean. The apartment came furnished, which seemed convenient then. Everything matched too perfectly. The cream-colored walls, the mahogany furniture, even the books on the shelf that looked like they'd been arranged by someone who understood symmetry better than reading. The previous tenant had left suddenly, according to the landlord, who avoided my eyes when he handed me the keys. Personal reasons, he'd said, jingling his key ring nervously. I'd been here 3 months when the vent first spoke to me. Not in words, but in that language buildings use, creaks, sighs, the subtle shifts that tell you a place is alive. The sound emerged from the square metal grate near the ceiling, just above where I'd positioned my reading chair. A gentle vibration, like a cat's purr trapped in metal. At first, I convinced myself it was normal. Old buildings have their quirks. The heating system probably needed maintenance. But normal doesn't explain why the hum intensified when I researched moving companies on my laptop, or why it fell silent when I deleted the browser history. Normal doesn't explain why the sound seemed to follow my thoughts. I started documenting everything. Small notebook, black ink, precise handwriting. Day 14. Hum present during morning coffee. Ceased when I mentioned to my sister I might visit her next month. Day 21. Vibrations stronger when I looked at apartment listings. Walls felt warm to touch. Day 35. Tried covering the vent with tape. Hum migrated to bathroom fan. The sound began appearing in other places. The refrigerator's compressor would kick in that same rhythmic pulse whenever I thought about somewhere else. The radiator in the bedroom started clicking in Morse code patterns that felt almost like conversation. When I pressed my ear to the wall, I could feel the building's heartbeat, steady and patient. My reflection in the bathroom mirror started looking wrong. Not drastically, just a half-second delay, like an old television with poor reception. I'd raise my hand, and my reflection would pause before mimicking the movement. When I brushed my teeth, the mirror me would continue brushing even after I'd stopped. Small things, easily dismissed if you weren't paying attention, but I was paying attention to everything now. The books on the shelf rearranged themselves. Same titles, same authors, but different order each morning. Always alphabetical, but by different systems, sometimes by author's last name, sometimes by first name, occasionally by the last word of the title. As if the apartment was trying different organizational methods, testing which one felt right. I found a journal wedged behind the radiator. Not mine. The handwriting was different, more angular, but the observations were eerily similar. The walls breathe when I sleep. Coffee tastes metallic when I think about leaving. My reflection blinks too much. The entries stopped abruptly mid-sentence. The hum is getting louder, and I think it's trying to tell me something important about. The page ended there. Clean tear, like someone had been interrupted. I started talking to the apartment. Soft conversations, like you'd have with a nervous pet. I'm not going anywhere today, I'd say to the vent, and the hum would settle into a contented rhythm. Just going to the store, I'd announce before leaving, and the lights would dim slightly, as if the place was settling in to wait. But the apartment was jealous of my outside world. Phone calls became difficult. Voices would distort. Words would stretch and compress like audio played at the wrong speed. My sister's voice turned into a mechanical whisper. My mother's laughter sounded like grinding metal. Eventually, I stopped answering calls altogether. The isolation felt natural, comfortable even. The apartment provided everything I needed. The refrigerator restocked itself with my favorite foods. The hot water never ran cold. The heating bill never came. Small mercies that made staying easy. I realized I hadn't left the building in weeks when I tried to order delivery and couldn't remember my address. The numbers on the door had faded, and the mailbox nameplate was blank. When I called the pizza place. I described the building, the cross streets, the landmarks, but they couldn't find me. That intersection doesn't exist, the driver said, confusion in his voice. The apartment was protecting me from the outside world, or protecting the outside world from me. The distinction became less important as the days blended together. I found more journals, 7 total, hidden in various places, inside the oven, taped under the kitchen sink, folded between mattresses. Different handwriting, same observations, the same progression from curiosity to documentation to acceptance. The same abrupt endings. The mirrors throughout the apartment began showing different reflections. Not dramatically different, just slight variations. In the bathroom mirror, I had longer hair. In the bedroom mirror, I wore clothes I'd never owned. In the kitchen window's reflection, I looked younger, happier, like a version of myself that had made better choices. I started preferring these other versions. They seemed more alive than whatever I was becoming. The hum evolved into something more complex. Harmonies layered underneath the main frequency, creating chords that resonated in my bones. When I hummed along, the apartment hummed back, and we created music together. Strange, beautiful songs that existed only in this space between walls. I stopped documenting. The notebook felt unnecessary. The apartment and I understood each other now. We were partners in this quiet existence, this gentle separation from the chaos outside. Sometimes I remember planning to leave. The memory feels foreign, like something that happened to someone else. Why would I want to leave? The rent never increases. The neighbors never complain. The walls know exactly how I like my coffee in the morning. The vent still hums, but now it's a lullaby. A reminder that I'm home, that I'm safe, that I'm exactly where I belong. The pitch never wavers anymore because I never think about leaving. I can't think about leaving. The apartment won't let me.